Tonight's story is about the night gods and demons churn the cosmic ocean and the most dangerous thing in all of creation rose to the surface first. It is the story of why Lord Shiva's throat is blue and why for thousands of years we called him the Neelkanth, the blue-throated one. Close your eyes if you like. Let me take you there. In the beginning of a great age, the gods were losing. The Asuras, the powerful, ambitious demons, had grown so strong that the gods could not stand against them. Battle after battle, loss after loss, the gods went to Lord Vishnu and fell at his feet. What can we do, they asked. How do we become strong enough? Vishnu was still for a long moment. Then he said there is something hidden at the very bottom of the cosmic ocean, the Ksheer Sagar, the ocean of milk. It is the Amrit, the nectar of immortality. If you drink it, you will never grow weak again, you will never lose again. But he said you cannot churn the ocean alone, the task is too great, you will need demons' help. The gods stared at him, work with our enemies? Vishnu nodded, promised them a share of the nectar. Together you churn the ocean, the Amrit will come. The gods agreed, they approached the demons agreed. And so began the greatest churning the universe had ever known. They used Mount Mandara as the churning rod, an entire mountain pulled from the earth and placed in the ocean. They used Vasuki, the great king of serpents, as the rope. The gods held his tail, the demons held his head. They pulled back and forth, the mountain turned, the ocean churned, the depths of creation stirred. From the churning, remarkable things rose to the surface. A divine elephant, a wish-granting tree, a flying horse of pure white, the goddess of fortune herself, Lakshmi, rising to the form of a lotus flower. Everyone was in awe, the gods and demons kept churning, the nectar was coming, they could feel it, and then something else rose from the deep. A darkness, a terrible heat, a smell so wrong that every being on earth recoiled at once. It was the Halahal, the poison of destruction born from the very depths of the cosmic ocean. It was not merely dangerous, it was the poison that, left unchecked, could destroy all three worlds, the earth, the heavens, and everything between. The demons dropped their end of the serpent, the gods dropped their end, everyone ran. The fumes spread, celestial beings collapsed, trees withered, even the greatest serpent Vasuki became pale and sick as the poison touched his skin. The gods ran to Brahma, help us. Brahma shook his head, only Shiv can help you now, go to Kailash, go now. They ran to Shiv, all of them, gods, demons, Brahma, Vishnu, everyone. They fell at Shiva's feet. Mahadev, you are the only one, the Halahal will destroy creation, you are the only being in the world who can contain it. Please, Shiv sat in silence. He looked at all of them, every god, every demon, the one who had created the universe sitting before him asking for help. He looked at Parvati seated beside him and said, it is the duty of the one who has been given the most strength to carry what others cannot. It is the duty of the master to protect the ones in his care, even when those in his care created the problems themselves. He stood, he went to the ocean, no ceremony, no announcement, no demand for recognition or gratitude. He simply gathered the Halahal in his great hands and the poison that no other being would touch and drank it. Parvati had been watching, and the moment the poison reached his throat, she flew forward. With both hands, she pressed her palms against his throat, stopping the poison there, not letting it descend into his body, not letting it rise back out, just holding it there in his throat between her hands. No one had asked her to, she simply could not let it go further. And so it stayed in his throat forever. And the color of the Halahal, the deep, terrible blue of the most dangerous thing in the universe, spread into his skin. His throat turned blue. From that day on, all the gods looked at Shiva and saw the blue of his throat, not as a wound, as a mark. The mark of the one who took the unbearable things so that everything else could continue. They gave him a new name, Neelkanth, the blue-throated one. Neel means blue, Kant means throat. The churning continued, the Amrit rose from the deep, the gods received their immortality and they never forgot what it cost, who it cost, and Shiva asked for nothing in return. Now here is what the story is really about. The gods churned the ocean for the Amrit, for immortality, for power, for themselves. But the first thing that rose was not the nectar, it was the poison. This is how it always is. Before anything great is created, before any transformation completes, the difficult thing rises first. The Halahal comes before the Amrit, and the question the universe always asks at the moment is, who will drink it? Most will step back. This is not cowardice, that is simply human. But there is always one who steps forward, not because they are fearless, but because they know something deeper than fear. Shiv drank the poison not because he could not feel it, he drank it because he understood that some burdens exist to be carried, not avoided. The blue of his throat is not a scar, it is wisdom made visible. So tonight, if you carry something that feels heavy, know that this is how all transformations begin. The poison before the nectar, the difficult thing before the gift. And somewhere in you there is a Shiv who knows what to do.